They deserve all the praise that they can get.
Isn't that brilliant? That's Nigel from Heartland in North Devon. You know, a debate rages now how funding will continue and what the NHS will look like in the future. The NHS Confederation, made up of all the organisations that commission and provide NHS services, is calling on a new plan for the health service. Let's hear from Niall Dickson. Niall is Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation. Welcome, Niall.
Morning, Gordon.
Morning. The NHS facing a lot of challenges. What would you say needs to change?
Well, the health service needs a considerable injection of cash, and the Prime Minister has announced that there is going to be a 10-year plan, and they're going to produce for the next 5 years an extra 3.4%, as they describe it, for the health service in England. Our view is that that is extremely welcome, in the sense that we've just gone through a period of 10 years where the health service has its lowest increases in the whole of its history, and obviously returning to something like the system that used to exist before, in the sense that if you looked in 2009, if you sat there and said, well, how much money has the health service had since it began? On average, it had around 3.5% more each year on top of inflation to enable it to meet growing demand and all the rest of it. So it looks like we're reverting to something pretty close to that going forward. The trouble is, of course, that we've already got a big gap because we've gone through 10 years of difficulty. An awful lot of things are not being done that should be done because there simply aren't the resources to do it. And also we face a real challenge in the number of older people, in particular, older people who have got a range of long-term illnesses or conditions. And this is something pretty new, and the challenge over the next 10 years is we're likely to see 10 to 15 years, we'll see a doubling in the number of people over 85. Many of those have got long-term conditions, and we'll see an extra 4.4 million over 65. These figures dwarf the number of extra young people we're going to have. So this is going to be quite a challenging period for the health service going forward.
Would you say we all take it for granted?
Well, in some ways I think we do, but as you've just heard from Nigel, there are an awful lot of people who owe an awful lot to the health service. It intervenes, it sort of crosses our paths at really important moments in our lives, you know, the arrival of a new member of the family or the loss of a loved one. Those kind of things resonate, I think, with all of us. And it's an unusual healthcare system in two ways. First of all, if you go to countries like France and Germany, there isn't an affection for a national system in the way that there is here. So people think of the NHS, they don't just think of the local hospital. Though Nigel interestingly mentioned both the hospital and the NHS in his comments. But I think the other thing is that the principles that underpin the NHS really go to the heart of what an awful lot of people think is absolutely right, which is that healthcare should be free when you need it, shouldn't have to worry or fear about paying doctors or hospital bills, and that everybody should be entitled to high quality care no matter where they live or who they are. And I think that is something that the British people have absolutely embraced.
Neil, I'd love you to listen to something if you've got half a minute, because I think your life will be enhanced by what I'd like to play for you. It's just a short clip, because earlier we heard from Christine Davidson, now in her 90s, Neil. And back in the 40s, she was one of those who helped establish the NHS, working for Niall Dickson. And she gives her thoughts about today's NHS.
I do think too many people think it's a free gift, you know. It is a gift, but not a free one.
How do you think the system now for managing the growing demand on the NHS, how do you think that needs to change?
It needs Bevan to come back again.
What do you think he would do today to help the NHS through its current pressures?
I don't think it would be money. It would be more going back to his idea of businessmen coming in, asking them to they get a business working. Why can't they get this working?
And just to conclude our conversation, Neil, if you don't mind, after hearing Christine there, would you say the NHS needs to have more of a business-like approach?
Well, I think it does increasingly have a business-like approach. It is a huge bureaucracy, so anything I say about the NHS or anything you hear today about the NHS will be true. It has things that really do not work well, and it has the absolute best of everything, and you'd expect that in such a huge and large service. I think as the NHS does need to embrace business more, and I think cooperating with private companies, people talk about privatisation, nobody would consider, I don't think there's any real support for anything that undermines the fundamental principles. But of course, using companies that know how to use data, help to identify patients who are most in need, there are a whole series of ways, and of course the NHS relies very heavily on cooperating with all sorts of different partners. As far as being more business-like in its approach, I think in some ways, yes, though there are lots of things, frankly, that government has done. They've created far too complex a structure at the moment, and we need to simplify that going forward. And I think that you need to free up people at local level to start introducing some of the big changes that are required. And the big changes really mean starting more to treat people in their own homes and in their own communities, and we've underfunded that area of the health service in particular. And only by doing that will we take some of the pressure off the hospitals, which at the moment are really feeling under terrible pressure because the numbers just keep rising in terms of the number of people who need hospital treatment.
Neil, brilliant to hear your views this morning. Thank you for your time. And we owe people like Christine, who we just heard from, don't we? And her contribution.
We do indeed, and
Yes.
It's the staff who have made it.
Yeah, indeed, very much so. Niall Dickson, thank you, the Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation. And we also heard Christine Davidson, now in her 90s, but Niall Bevan asked for her help in setting up the NHS. What a great thing. It's BBC Radio Devon, 8:17 is the time. Let's catch the morning news headlines now with Lisa.
The couple critically ill in Wiltshire were victims of the same nerve agent as the former Russian spy, but no one's quite sure how it happened. Today, the government's Emergency Cobra Committee are meeting to assess the situation. A study of 4 rivers in Devon has found what scientists say is a worrying level of chemicals. One of them had 29 different pesticides in it, though the scientists do say that's still below EU legal limits. As we've just been hearing, events are being held across the UK today to mark the 70th birthday of the National Health Service. Thousands of NHS workers, past and present, will attend services at Westminster Abbey and York Minster. The weather from bbc.co.uk/Devon. The sun should be back this afternoon, yay, with a top temperature of 25 degrees. UV index, though, is high, pollen also high.
Radio Devon.
Travel news.
Well, the A379 at Bantham Cross, there are some temporary lights for trench work. Long queues of traffic both directions now, and it's not due to be completed until the 19th of July. And that's Bantham Cross, temporary lights on the A379. The A30 Exeter bound between Fenny Bridges and Daisy Mount Cross. One lane's blocked there by a single vehicle collision. No problems reported at the airport or the trains. Traffic's flowing well on the Tamar. There's a 10-minute wait, 3 ferries running between Tor Point and Devonport. And don't forget, though, if there is a travel story that we're not talking about, or you can give us an update, then call Paul 0345 300 28 29.
Wimbledon update on BBC Radio Devon.
Roger Federer through to the 3rd round at Wimbledon. The defending men's champion beat Lucas Latsko in straight sets and says he's having fun.
Match point for Federer. Slams the forehand back deep onto the baseline. Federer forehand again into the corner. It's a winner. And it is game, set, match. Roger Federer for his 26th consecutive set of tennis at Wimbledon.
You know, important is to be happy out there, to play so you're having fun as well. Of course, you sometimes play the percentages, but if you do that too much, it becomes a bit boring if you like it. So I like to mix it up as much as possible, and I think that worked out well.
Well, we have the privilege of our tennis reporter, Jamie Broughton, at the All England Club this morning. Hi, Jamie. Federer cruising through the early rounds then.
Yes, he's making it look very, very easy, isn't he? And I suppose only the great champions can do that. And I certainly don't think anybody's going to beat him in the first week. And afterwards, Gordon, it was very interesting. Roger Federer was asked the question about the Swiss national football team being knocked out of the World Cup. And he gave a really interesting insight into the mind of a champion when he was talking about if you want to be a top player, whether it's a footballer or a tennis player, you have to have that right intensity, whether you're playing, whether you're practicing, and not just playing as well, you know, in big Grand Slam events, but also in the smaller events. And he was you know, I wouldn't say Roger Federer was angry. He doesn't get angry very often, does he? But he was certainly irked about Switzerland being knocked out, but almost suggesting that they didn't have the right intensity for the whole year, not just the World Cup.
Yeah, is it right? A story I remember from years ago, or am I dreaming this, Jamie? Doesn't he get a cow every time he wins a tournament, Federer?
I think he used to, but I think then there was a little bit of a milk mountain, wasn't there,